attractive targets for soldiers on the ground, and they're usually shot at on runs of this kind. At least 6 have been shot down, and an NBC cameraman, Grant Wolfkill, who was aboard one of them, has now been a communist prisoner for a year. In some of the others, Americans have been killed. Six Laotians were killed in this Jeep. It hit a mine placed by the Pathet Lao, and then the men in it were ambushed. An American usually went along on the patrol. This time he didn't. The commander of the advisory team in Phong Hong is Captain Thomas Smith, 34, of Fayetteville, North Carolina. He trains and advises, but he does not command this Lao officer. Probably the most popular thing any team does is this: inoculating against smallpox and generally giving medical attention. There are no doctors in this part of Laos, or for that matter, in almost any part of Laos. And the advisory units always include a medic who can offer first aid and a little preventive medicine. In some places I visited in Southeast Asia, I saw children who were obviously going to die no matter what was being done for them, but the medics do their best. The war in Laos has been quiet for months, and a ceasefire is in effect while the political maneuvering continues. There is an occasional artillery duel, and every so often each side improves its position by pinching off a bit of ground. On our side, there is a struggle of wills between the Royal Lao government and the United States. We say the Laos must join a coalition with the neutralists and communists because that is the most advantageous arrangement we can possibly get. We have cut off economic assistance to force them to do it. So far, it has had no effect. The so-called right-wing Laotian strongman, General Phumi Nosavang, installed by Washington in 1960, refuses to budge. Now he is told that if he doesn't join the coalition, the whole country may fall to the communists. Phumi told me that the Kennedy administration was asking his government to commit suicide. Laos is a country of 2 million people, and probably none of them would object to it being called a backwater. The Laos long ago decided that industriousness was not among the more sensible human qualities and conduct themselves accordingly. At Wat Thai Airport outside Vientiane, the United States is spending a great deal of money improving the runways, which will be the only concrete strips in the country. Everybody agrees that it would be too bad if they fell into the hands of the communists. The Laos themselves are building the ceremonial archway, this Arc de Triomphe, for their king's coronation, whenever they get around to that. It is an extremely large job, and it takes a large amount of money and materials. This does not bother the Royal Lao government because the money and materials are ours. But from our point of view, it's too bad that at first the builders neglected to put in pilings because that increased the cost. The Arc, which leans a bit, will stand at the head of an avenue called the Champs-Élysées, complete with traffic light that doesn't work. When you have a Champs-Élysées, of course, you need cars. We have taken care of that. In 1959, when the outlook was very bad, we gave the Laos so much economic assistance that they had trouble spending it. They overcame the difficulty by buying Mercedes-Benz cars. Any city-dwelling Lao who does not have a Mercedes may be considered either underprivileged or not very bright. It may be unkindly suggested that the money for the Mercedes could have been put to better use if the government had tried hard to find one.
In Laos, the Kennedy administration has decided to settle for a draw if it can get one. Vietnam is different. South Vietnam has become a laboratory. The communists are trying out a kind of warfare that conceivably will put to work in other places too if it works in Vietnam. The United States is trying to show the communists that this form of warfare can be beaten even where the government is shaky and disliked, as it is in South Vietnam.
About 6 months ago, the position of the government of South Vietnam grew desperate. Since then, the American military mission there has reached towards 7,000, and the situation has improved. The American military in South Vietnam train, advise, and support. This involves the normal amount of paperwork, which is to say an abnormal amount of paperwork, and 60% of the Americans stay in the capital city, Saigon. Here, a familiar problem arises. Americans have more money than most other people, and in predictable ways this causes resentment, a resentment that grows as more Americans come in. Inevitably, their presence drives prices up, and they take the best housing, and they have an advantage with the girls. This Navy chief is not in Saigon. He is at Nha Trang, about 200 miles to the north, where he trains Vietnamese sailors in firefighting. South Vietnam's Navy has 24 ships and guards 1,500 miles of coastline. Most Viet Cong supplies come by sea, and the United States Navy instructs the Vietnamese in patrolling and in spotting unfriendly craft. Sometimes it helps them to do it. South Vietnam's Air Force flies supply, reconnaissance, bombing, and strafing missions against the Viet Cong, who have no Air Force. For combat, the aircraft used are AD-6s and T-28s, of which this is one. In the United States, they're used for training. In South Vietnam, American instructors may go along, and if a fight develops, they have been known to teach by example. Planes of this kind are vulnerable on low-level runs, but there have been incidents in which they've caught the Viet Cong crossing canals and killed them by dozens. As in Laos and everywhere else, American military units in South Vietnam have medics. It doesn't take the local people long to hear about them, and the medics help them on their own time, and the immediate effect is no doubt beneficial. In the longer run, it creates expectations and leads the people to demand more of their government, more probably than the government can supply. Some 3 weeks ago, a company of Marine helicopters arrived off South Vietnam aboard a carrier and flew to a new base at Sac Trong in the delta of the Mekong River. The Marines brought everything they needed with them, claimed to be ready for action in 2 hours, and in a matter of days they were airlifting South Vietnamese soldiers into 2 battles they helped the government to win. The Sac Trong area has been infiltrated and controlled by the Viet Cong for years. The Marines live in a compound surrounded by barbed wire with a minefield around that. They're not allowed off the base except with armed South Vietnamese escorts, and even that didn't prevent one of their trucks being fired on in Sac Trong. They're living as though they were still on the aircraft carrier, but on dry land. So far, United States casualties in Vietnam have been remarkably low, 19 dead, only 2 in combat. It is necessary, however, to be ready for more, and there will also be sickness and disease. A field hospital is being set up in Nha Trang, complete with nurses, and in the meantime, one of the nurses is giving pudding bowl haircuts. The single most publicized American activity in Vietnam has been the airlift by helicopter. There are now almost 100 helicopters, and they get South Vietnamese soldiers into battle, into places that would otherwise take hours or days to walk to. This offsets an advantage the Viet Cong have had, their ability to set ambushes and to fade into the jungle and disappear. Sometimes the Viet Cong dig themselves into the ground and leave only tiny holes for air. Most American advice and instruction must be given in the line, on the ground, in the endless searches and patrols, because the South Vietnamese units being advised and instructed cannot be pulled out. A great deal depends on the individual advisor. Some are excellent, others less so. Occasionally, the instructors turn out to know less than those they are instructing. This is inevitable since the Vietnamese have been fighting for a long time. This is an advisor extremely popular with the Vietnamese, Captain Fred Darden of San Bernardino, California. 10 years in the Army, married, 4 children, expert on small arms. His tour of duty in Vietnam is 12 months. When we saw Darden, he was accompanying an operation into an area called the Land of the Lost. When the Kennedy administration decided that saving South Vietnam was going to be a very sizable task, it assigned a force